Stay with that story now. The Hawks have seized the shipload of cocaine, as we just heard, with 500 million rands from a container at the Durban harbour last month. 2 more drug busts were executed at a depot in Isipingo in Durban as well. And the largest shipment of drugs was also found in Gauteng, where 4 people were arrested after a 400 million rand cocaine bust along the N1 in Pretoria. Now, so reports are suggesting that at least 4 tons of cocaine have been seized in South Africa since March. To discuss more around this, we're joined from Cape Town by Peter Gastrow. He's a senior advisor at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Peter, thanks for your time as always, and thanks for coming on so late on a Sunday night. Now, the numbers for plebs like myself is quite shocking. 4 tons seized since March of this year. But when it comes to that kind of thing, that probably is just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of numbers of drugs and tons of drugs that are actually making their way through the ports of South Africa. What should we make of the numbers that we're seeing? Is this a spike in drug trafficking through the country, or is this normal fare a year and a half in to a global pandemic, which I believe has also had an impact on how these kinds of the things are travelling around the world as well?
Hello, good evening. We need to remember that the drug traffickers involved in these type of transactions are not just local gangsters. They are sophisticated international businessmen with experience of global marketing and global transport. So as you mentioned, these drugs, in this case cocaine, comes from Latin America. And what they do is they try and reach the biggest markets for these drugs, which inevitably is the wealthy countries in Europe, the US, partly India and Pakistan, for example. And in order to do that, they don't necessarily take the shortest route for those drugs to get there. They select routes where there is a relatively low risk for them. 10 years ago, that was West Africa. Tons and tons, about 40 tons per annum were transported through West Africa 10 years ago to reach Europe and other countries. It seems to me that they now regard South Africa also to have a low enough risk to increasingly try and use this country as a transit route for the towards the wealthy markets for cocaine. And no one has the actual statistics. You and I can only guess. But I would agree with you that the 4 tons that have been seized are probably only a very small percentage of what actually moves through the country to elsewhere, and partly what stays here.
What is our biggest weak point in South Africa? If it's now believed that we are a target, almost a soft target, as it were, for the transport of illicit drugs, as it were, what are the biggest weak points for South Africa? I suppose we'll start with our porous ports, as it were.
Well, partly what makes us attractive are our strong points and our weak points. Our strong points, for example, we have international airports, we have harbours, good communications, good banking system, comfortable place to live. These are aspects which international traffickers like to work with. On the downside for South Africa, in other words, what reduces the risk for drug traffickers is a very corrupt government system until now, really a non or very weakly functioning intelligence system, and it doesn't seem, one doesn't get the impression as though the state regards these types of drug traffickings as something which needs to be prioritized and which needs to be pursued with vigor. So the risk is low for them. The chance of being caught, these international drug traffickers, is not as high as it seems to have been in the past. That is why increasingly they're using the country. If the risk was high, they would not select South Africa.
Another weak point being, of course, like you said, corruption being an issue. I mean, if you look at the case of the drug seizure on the 9th of July here in Johannesburg, 4 suspects were arrested and 3 out of the 4 were police officials that were arrested as well. That really does paint a very sad and tragic picture, doesn't it?
Well, there you have a large part of the answer. These traffickers who operate internationally deal with huge volumes of money. They don't only try and bribe individuals, be they state officials or private sector, with hundreds and thousands of rands. It sometimes goes into millions. So if they find out that, as in South Africa until now, increasingly police officers can be bribed, that makes it an ideal transit route for them. The chances of being caught are reduced as a result. So yes, we've gone through the traumatic experience of state capture and vast corruption allegations. I think these things are all noticed and picked up by drug traffickers as well, not only by people involved in the formal economy. They are very well informed about the situation here, and as soon as the gap presents itself, they will pursue it.
Now, you said earlier that you don't believe government takes this serious enough. Would that also mean that not enough emphasis or resources are being put behind the collection of intelligence to try and break the back of this problem?
That is certainly part of the problem. We all know the serious situation in which crime intelligence finds itself. Without a head, clashes between head office and regional office, corruption allegations. So this is something which undermines any attempt to investigate serious international crimes such as drug trafficking from other continents. So the capacity is not there. I think the management needs to spruce itself up, and it needs to be acting as a professional investigative organization. And then sometimes I'm also not sure whether the detective services or those agencies which should be doing the job are not overstretched. These are type of crimes which require smart accountants, forensic investigators, police officials with vast experience. It is not just the sergeant with the docket under his arm which is going to catch this game. It really has to do with cybercrime, with international communications. They are complicated. And I am not an insider with the police. I'm not sure to what extent we're really equipped to do so. I think we need to take it more seriously, because already in many parts of our country, particularly in poorer parts as well, there are serious drug addiction problems, primarily not with cocaine that much, but with heroin and products that one gets from heroin. These are issues which really break up our society, our family lives. We need to do more about it. Now, there are changes coming through at the moment as far as the security cluster is concerned. I just remain hopeless that we turn over hopeful, sorry, not hopeless. I remain hopeful that the security cluster will also turn over a new page as far as drug trafficking is concerned. It needs to be taken seriously. The top courts need to be involved, not like 2 years ago when they confiscated almost a ton of heroin in the Cape. It was passed on to a lower court, and it didn't take long for a verdict of not guilty to be made. I'm not saying that could perhaps not have been the case, but it wasn't taken seriously as far as I'm concerned. It should have been dealt with by the Supreme Court. It was a seizure with international proportions, because that doesn't happen anywhere as far as the global situation is concerned. We need to be serious about it.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, the latest figures released in that story around the Hawk saying that at least 20% of that shipment that had been seized, 20% normally is meant for the domestic market and the payment of drug traffickers. And it's not so much, like you said, just about that specific drug landing in the hands of a South African, as it were, or a local person. It is also what cog that it is in the greater wheel that is South Africa's criminal underworld, isn't it? It's a huge part of that, and what flows from that.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of evidence that those South Africans, for example, who are involved in getting these drugs through the country, who get their cut, they don't always get the cut in terms of cash. They get a slice of the cocaine and then sell it. So they become involved not only in drug trafficking, but in all sorts of organized crime. It therefore fuels organized crime and illicit activities generally. It involves money laundering. It involves all sorts of other activities. So you're right. We're not only talking with drugs. We're talking with all sorts of ancillary criminal activities which our society is subjected to.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. That's Peter Gastrow. He's the Senior Advisor at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. We thank him for his time this evening.